Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Jason Youngblood, the author of The Gospel of Napoleon Hill, Scholar or Scammer. I just wanted to quickly recap the end of episode six. I realized that my screen didn't share, so I did wanted to show you those articles related to Napoleon Hill working for the Embolden Coat Company and his supervisor, Victor St. Clair Payne, at Embolden, also being the superintendent for Carnegie Furnace, which was co-owned by Andrew Carnegie and started and founded by Andrew Carnegie. So that was a very key Andrew Carnegie connection. So I wanted to show you that and then also show you the names that are listed in the Law of Success in Think and Grow Rich. Because one of the claims that the critic makes from the Untold Story of Napoleon Hill, the greatest self-help scammer of all time, Matt Novak claims that he didn't start making the claim that Napoleon Hill didn't start making the claim that he knew Andrew Carnegie until after Andrew Carnegie passed away in 1919. Now, I will contend with that if that was the case, then the same is true for other people that he mentions as well too, like Henry Ford, Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, and others, people who are of note who he mentions as mentors and contributors to his philosophy of success. They would have also had to pass away first too, because they were still alive when he was making these claims and they didn't refute it. That actually negates his argument there. Not only that, Andrew Carnegie did pass away in 1919, but in 1917, Napoleon Hill released a book called How to Sell Your Services with a contribution from Andrew Carnegie in that book. So I wanted to just show you that article real quick. So I will share my screen with you and just bear with me here. So um, if you can see my screen here, this is the article I was showing you yesterday, and it is from January 8th, 1903. This is a typo. This is supposed to be O.M. Hill, and I'm going to blow it up for you. So it just says O.M. Hill, supposed to be O.N. Hill for Honorable Oliver Napoleon, who for some time has been connected with the Colonial Coal and Coke Company at Dorchester, Virginia, has accepted a position as bookkeeper and stenographer for the Embolden Coke Company at this place. So Napoleon Hill is accepting a position at the Embolden Coal and Coke Company. And so if I pull up the next article showing you who his supervisor was at the Embolden Coal and Coke Company. And so this is from August of 1904, and you'll see who his supervisor is, who he mentions in his work. But not only that, we see it here in newspaper articles. So coal mines and coke ovens and Bowden Coal and Coke. And Bowden Coal Company and the Bowden Coke Company operating coal mines and coke ovens near Big Stone Gap, Virginia, have consolidated and incorporated as the Bowden Coal and Coke Company, with C.P. Perrin of New York president, Julian Kennedy of Pittsburgh, PA, keeping in mind that Andrew Carnegie was from Pittsburgh, okay? So there's a Carnegie connection in here. Vice President W.L. Webb of New York, Secretary um, and Victor St. Clair Payne of Big Stone Cap, Virginia, treasurer and general manager. So Victor St. Clair Payne was the treasurer and general manager of Embolden Coat Company, where Napoleon Hill worked. In one of the copies of Think and Grow Rich, he actually writes an introduction thanking Victor St. Clair Payne for being a contributor to his success in life. And we also see that not only was Victor St. Clair Payne the treasurer and general manager at Embolden Coat Company and Napoleon Hill's supervisor here. All right. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and share with you one last article here, or one more article that shows you that Victor St. Clair Payne was also formerly the superintendent of the Carnegie Furnace Company. Okay, so Mr. Payne holds an official position now with the Virginia Iron, Coal, and Coal and Coke Company. Those are tongue twisters, but this is the parent company for Embolden. This was owned by a man named Rufus Ayers. He owned Virginia Iron, Coal, and Coke. And this is the parent company for Embolden Coke Company, which is where Napoleon Hill worked. He worked directly for Rufus Ayers as a personal assistant, and then he went on to become bookkeeper and stenographer at several of his companies, not only in Bowdoin, but also Colonial Coal and Coke, as well as some other companies that he had in addition to a coal mine and a bank. And so you'll see here that he is the former superintendent of Carnegie Furnace Company. And then this last one I'll show you on the Carnegie connection here. I believe it's actually right here. So I'll show you this article that the Carnegie Furnace Company is actually co-owned by Andrew Carnegie and a man named John T. Wilder. Here they are selling Carnegie Furnace, which is a part of the Carnegie business. And he not only owns Carnegie Furnace, he owns Carnegie Hotel, but Carnegie Furnace, which is where Victor St. Clair Payne was a superintendent, is owned by Andrew Carnegie. So Victor St. Clair Payne worked for Andrew Carnegie at Carnegie Furnace. He leaves there and becomes the general manager and treasurer of the Embolden Coke Company and becomes an executive for Rufus Ayers. So he actually is Napoleon Hill's supervisor at Embolden Coal and Coke Company, and he knows Andrew Carnegie personally. So there's another Andrew Carnegie connection in addition to Robert Love Taylor, who introduces Napoleon Hill to Andrew Carnegie. And in addition to that, we also have evidence of that from Cyrus H.K. Curtis, who Napoleon Hill says Andrew Carnegie introduced him to. And we see articles in his magazine, the Saturday Evening Post, advertising Napoleon Hill's Automobile College. So I just wanted to close that out. And then I'm also going to show you here um, some of the names that Napoleon Hill mentions. So this is I believe this is Think and Grow Rich. So this is Law of Success. So he does the same thing in Think and Grow Rich, where he lists off names of people who personally contributed to his philosophy of success. And one of the claims that Matt Novak makes is that Napoleon Hill didn't start claiming that he knew these people until they passed away, specifically Andrew Carnegie. So let's take a look at this. So this was published in 1928. It was actually written in 1924, all right, and originally published in 1925, but not nationally released until 1928. And so if we look at Henry Ford, all right, Henry Ford didn't pass away until 1947. So here he is in a nationally syndicated book claiming that he personally knew Henry Ford, and Henry Ford didn't pass away until 1947. Thomas Edison, all right. Again, mentioning him in 1928. I knew him personally. Thomas Edison didn't pass away until 1931. If we look at Franklin Roosevelt, all right, Franklin Roosevelt, he's actually listed in Think and Grow Rich, all right, but that was released in 1937, and Franklin Roosevelt didn't pass away until 1945, 8 years later. He's mentioning these people and name dropping them, saying that he personally knew them and that they personally contributed to his philosophy of success while they're still alive. All right, Orville Wright, okay, one of the Wright brothers. All right, so Wilbur Wright had actually passed away earlier, but Orville Wright was still alive and he lived until 1948. He mentions him as well in Think and Grow Rich and Law of Success as somebody who he personally knew and associated with. And this was 20 years to 9 years earlier that he's mentioning him in a nationally published book. President William Howard Taft, who is right here, William Howard Taft, a former president. He mentions him in 1928. He doesn't pass away until 1930. William Howard Taft is still alive while he's mentioning him and name dropping him. William Wrigley Jr. All right. Again, this is 1928. He doesn't pass away until 1932. Frank Vanderlip. Napoleon Hill mentions him as a contributor as well. And this is the president of the Carnegie Foundation and Andrew Carnegie's right-hand man. Here he is right here. He doesn't pass away until 1937, mentions him in a book released in 1928. Harvey Firestone. If we go back up here, this was the founder of Firestone Tires in Akron, Ohio. 1928, again, the book is released. He doesn't pass away until 1938. He is still alive during the time Napoleon Hill is mentioning him as a personal reference. John D. Rockefeller does not pass away until 1937. All right, Charles Schwab. This is another Andrew Carnegie close associate. He was the president of Carnegie Steel and U.S. Steel, which was started by Andrew Carnegie and J.P. Morgan Chase. He doesn't pass away until 1939. We have another one here in John W. Davis. He was the Solicitor General in the Wilson administration. All right. He doesn't pass away until 1955. So it's not only a Wilson administration connection as far as Napoleon Hill knowing Woodrow Wilson. This is also somebody who didn't pass away until 1955, who he mentions that he knows personally. Samuel Insull, who was actually in the Wilson administration as well. He's listed right here. His name is misspelled. I don't know if this Napoleon forgot to spell his name with two L's, but his name is actually spelled with two L's. Samuel Insull. He was actually the head of the Illinois Council of Defense in the Wilson administration during World War One. He doesn't pass away until 1938. And then the final person that I want to mention is David Starr Jordan. Let me see if I can find him. He's definitely listed in Think and Grow Rich. So yeah, in Think and Grow Rich, and I'll just share that with you real quick before I continue. So you'll see a lot of the same names here. You have Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, John W. Davis. And let me just make sure this is the right one. All right, here we go. So this is Think and Grow Rich, and he mentions Henry Ford, 1947, William Wrigley Jr., 1932. He was mentioned in 1928. We have others here. John Davis doesn't pass away till 1955. Wilbur Wright, he passes away earlier than this is released, but his brother Orville Wright doesn't pass away until, let me check my notes here. He didn't pass away until 1948. Now, this is David Starr Jordan. This is a typo in this PDF, but it is spelled correctly in Think and Grow Rich. This was the founding president of Stanford University, somebody that was on the board of trustees for the Carnegie Foundation, so very closely associated with Andrew Carnegie. And he did not pass away until 1937 as well. And so he is mentioned here in the book Think and Grow Rich, which was written in 1936 and released in 1937. So I'm just refuting the claim that Napoleon Hill didn't start to mention these big name, high status figures or wealthy figures until they passed away, so they didn't have a chance to refute it. He says that about Andrew Carnegie, but the same would have to be true of these men as well. All right, so I want to move on to the next claim that Novak makes. And so I'm going to pull up the article, The Untold Story of Napoleon Hill, the greatest self-help scammer of all time. And so if we scroll down to the next claim that Novak makes, all right, after he says that there's no way that he knew Andrew Carnegie, he states here in this paragraph, Hill was involved in countless scams over the years. One of his earliest involved buying lumber on credit, never paying his suppliers, and selling the lumber to others for cash at rates well below market value. This, as you can guess, didn't last very long before Hill went on the run. So we'll talk about that later as well, too, if he actually went on the run. It appears that way, but we'll delve into that more specifically. But that was just one of the many scams that Hill would try over the years. Napoleon Hill was a man whose entire racket was reinvention. So he would start a business, scam people, run, and then reinvent himself as to not get caught, selling himself and his ideas as transformative. From his involvement with an infamous cult, which we talked about that in the first episode, that used Think and Grow Rich as their most holy book, to embezzlement from his own charity, the most fascinating aspects of Hill's many misdeeds have been forgotten by history. So I wanted to focus on what he said in the first sentence of this paragraph is that one of his earliest scams involved buying lumber on credit. And then it talks further about that later on as well. Um, and so, as you read this article, it's a very lengthy and comprehensive article. He goes into detail about what that entails. And I wanted to just show you what actually happens and share the story with you before we get to that point in another episode. So, this is episode 7 that I'm starting to talk about his so-called scam of buying lumber on credit, reselling it for market value, and keeping the profits, and then not returning the profits to the people that he borrowed the lumber from. And so if I share my screen and show you the Gospel of Napoleon Hill, Scholar or Scammer, all right, this is still going to be in chapter 1, all right? And this is on page 45 of the book, and it's the section is just called Jesse O'Neill Acree and Jesse Haywood Shreve. So I'm just going to read through it very quickly and then just trying to explain what it all says and means. So after his promotion to general manager of Rufus Ayres's coal mine, the next time there is any public record of Hill, he is living in Alabama. Sometime in 1905, Hill had become the sales manager of the Marbury Lumber Company in Marbury, Alabama. The president of the company was David Hatton Marbury Sr., or D.H. Marbury, which David Hatton stood for D.H., or DH stood for David Hatton. The town of Marbury was originally called Bozeman, Alabama, what was later named after David's father, Josiah Marbury. Next, Hill worked for Jesse O'Neill Acree as the sales manager of the Pearson Lumber Company in Andalusia, Alabama. In March of 1906, a man named Henry Perkins purchased Pearson from Acree, inheriting Hill as his employee. When Perkins founded the Empire Lumber Company the following month, Hill continued to work for him as Empire's sales managers. So that's another lumber company. He just moved on from Pearson over to Empire. All right. Cree had been so impressed with Hill, his original employer at Pearson, had been so impressed with Hill that when he started his next lumber company, he took him in as a business partner. So the Cree Hill Lumber Company was founded on June 28th, 1907 in Mobile, Alabama. All right. Acree was the president while Hill was named secretary and treasurer of the company. However, after the bank panic of 1907, in October of that year, the business didn't survive much longer. During the bank panic, the New York Stock Exchange fell almost 50% from its peak the previous year. Hysteria then ensued, and many people began frantically making withdrawals from banks. The bank panic eventually spread throughout the nation as many banks filed for bankruptcy. Additionally, the demand for lumber deceased Additionally, the demand for lumber decreased to a sluggish crawl. As a result, Acree abandoned the company and sold his half of the business to Hill in June of 1908. So 1 year later, he completely abandons the business, Jesse Acree, and sells 100% of the business to Napoleon Hill. Napoleon Hill is only 24 years old at this time, so he's a very young man. All right. This move instantly changed Hill's role from secretary to president of the company. As president of Acree Hill Lumber Company, Hill then sold it to a wealthy real estate agent by the name of Jesse Hayward Shreve in September of that year. There is historical record of this in the newspapers. All right. So when he says that there was a lumber company scam that he was a part of, Napoleon Hill wasn't even the owner anymore. He sold it in September of 1908. All right. And then he moved to Washington, D.C. with his same exact name. So what these critics will try to tell you is that he changed his name. But like I said before in a previous episode, my name is Jason Allen Youngblood. If I'm trying to defraud and scam businesses and change my name and go on the run, I'm not going to be just known as Allen Youngblood. It's my middle name and my last name. I'm going to change my name altogether. I'm not going to have any parts of my name in there unless it's just a complete rearrangement of one of my 3 names. And so he just began to be known as Napoleon Hill. And the reason for that is twofold. One is he was writing for Bob Taylor's magazine. He wanted a catchy, more salesy type name that would be more of an author name so that he could be more popular as a writer. The other one is his wife, Edith Hill, at the time divorced him, and he was trying to evade her by no longer being known as Oliver. He wanted to be known as Napoleon as well, too. But primarily, it was so that he could be more of a popular writer. He wasn't trying to evade anybody and do any business scams. So we'll find out more about that here as we read. Jesse Shreve was born and raised in Andalusia. Okay, so where Hill had worked for the Pearson Lumber Company. Shreve went on to incorporate the American Real Estate and Development Company in Montgomery, Alabama, in October of 1907. He ran the company with his brothers, George Herbert Shreve and Hilliard Clement Shreve. With Jesse Shreve now living in Montgomery, Hill presumably contacted him about buying a Cree Hill after knowing each other in Andalusia. So Jesse Shreve was raised in Andalusia, where Napoleon Hill worked for the Pearson Lumber Company. They both lived in different cities now, though, but they did have Andalusia in common. Jesse Shreve went on to start a business in Montgomery, and Napoleon Hill, or Oliver Napoleon Hill, went on to start a business in Mobile, Alabama. Meanwhile, a man named George Housen started the Waverly Heights Development Company in July of 1908. Jesse Shreve then joined Housen and became a salesperson or a salesman for Waverly. Although he was the new owner of Cree Hill, Shreve continued using the original name, Cree Hill Lumber Company, with Hill listed as president. Under this guise, Shreve sent letters to wholesale lumber companies across the country using George Housen as a reference. He asked the companies to ship him lumber on credit and agreed to repay them in full once it was sold. The letters were signed, "Yours truly, a Cree Hill Lumber Company, per Hill President." He sent out letters on the old stationery of a Cree Hill Lumber Company, and they were still already pre-signed, "Yours truly, a Cree Hill Lumber Company, per Hill President." So he did it under the guise of, "Hey, I'm Napoleon Hill asking for a credit," because the lumber companies were already familiar with the Cree Hill Lumber Company. He didn't want to change the name. This was part of his plan. Then, once Shreve received the lumber, he sold it to retail companies at lower than market value prices. However, since he had gotten the lumber on credit, he decided to evade his creditors and keep 100% of the profits for himself. Consequently, by writing letters to lumber companies for the purpose of deceiving them, he caused the Cree Hill to be charged with using the mails to defraud. Additionally, since Cree and Hill's names were still attached to the company, Shreve's creditors sought them out instead. So they began to seek out Jesse Cree and Napoleon Hill or Oliver Hill instead of Jesse Shreve because their names were still on the business paperwork. He did not sell the company correctly. He was 24 years old, so when he sold it, he gave the stationery to him. He did it in a hurry, and he was in a hurry to get to Washington, D.C., but it had nothing to do with him defrauding these people. It had everything to do with Edith Hill divorcing him at that time, who had lived with him in Alabama and recently moved back to Virginia. And he was trying to get away from her and start a new career as a writer for Bob Taylor's magazine. By October of 1908, the damage Shreve had caused finally came to a head as several lumber companies began suing the Cree Hill Lumber Company. When newspaper reporters went to the Cree Hill office looking for Hill, the secretary told them that he had left the city on September 8th and had not been seen since. They were also informed that Cree was no longer associated with the company and had sold it to Hill. After no owners of Cree Hill could be located, the creditors filed a petition for the company to be forced into bankruptcy. So Jesse Shreve was nowhere on the paperwork. Okay, according to them, they looked at the documents of incorporation and saw Jesse Cree and Napoleon Hill still on there. So when he sold it to him, it was just a cash in exchange for all of the stationery. They did not change over the names on the business or the documents of incorporation. And so everybody still thought that Jesse Shreve, I'm sure he noticed this and continued to just do business as Napoleon Hill. And they never changed the name from Napoleon Hill and Jesse Shreve, or Napoleon Hill and Jesse Cree over to Jesse Shreve. Then on October 17th of 1908, Attorney Bart Chamberlain submitted the petition for bankruptcy to the U.S. District Court. Then on November 5th, Judge A.T. Tolman declared Cree Hill bankrupt, and a warrant for Hill's arrest was issued by federal authorities. Finally, John Gaylord Hamilton was appointed receiver for the company on December 2nd. After dodging a Cree Hill's legal issues, Shreve organized the city's jewelry company in Montgomery on April 16th, 1909. So it seems like he gets away with it, but he starts another company. It's a jewelry company in Montgomery. Then Shreve and his six brothers did the same thing they had done with the Cree Hill. They were credited jewelry from wholesale companies to sell for full price in their jewelry store. Then they filed for bankruptcy, claiming that they had shipped $20,000 worth of jewelry to their general merchandise store in Greenville, Alabama. According to their bankruptcy claim, the day after the store received the shipment of $20,000 worth of jewelry, the store and the jewelry were destroyed by a fire. Therefore, they were requesting that the city jewelry company be placed into bankruptcy due to loss of goods. However, the jewelry that was claimed to be lost in a fire was later found hidden in warehouses in other cities. All right. As a result of their false claim, the seven Sheaf brothers were arrested for a conspiracy to defraud the government on April 22nd, 1910. The details connecting the Acree Hill and city jewelry cases were released in a newspaper report on April 29th of 1909, okay, or of 1910, connects the Cree Hill, the same people that were defrauding city jewelry were the same people that were defrauding a Cree Hill through a Cree Hill. In the article, Jesse Shreve and George Housen were reported to have bought lumber on credit from a Cincinnati lumberman named Greg Stewart. The Cincinnati post office inspector then revealed that the lumber purchased from Greg Stewart was received by the Cree Hill Lumber Company. This was in October of 1908, well after Hill was already gone from Mobile in Washington, D.C. So this outed Jesse Shreve to be the culprit who had been buying lumber on credit. So here's this lumberman in Cincinnati that says, hey, I sold lumber to a person who said he was Napoleon Hill, and it was actually to the Cree Hill Lumber Company, but it was after Napoleon Hill even owned the company. So this outs Shreve as the person that had been buying lumber on credit. Afterwards, Shreve hired a Cincinnati lawyer named Frank Goodhue to defend a Cree Hill against the charge of not paying for lumber. And then on May 5th, 1910, U.S. District Attorney William R.H. Armbrecht discovered that the Shreve brothers were involved in the Acree Hills fraud. He then stated that he would thoroughly investigate both cases. Finally, in March of 1911, the Shreve brothers pleaded guilty to conspiracy to defraud the government through city jewelry and to using the mails to defraud through Acree Hill. As a result of their admission, Daniel Shreve was sentenced to 15 months in prison. Joseph Shreve was fined $1,350. George Shreve was fined $600 and Reuben Shreve was fined $350. The charges against Archie and Hilliard Shreve were dismissed. Jesse Shreve, the major offender in the Acree Hill case, was fined $2,200. The judge for the case ordered that Jesse not be in prison due to his bad health. All right. Lastly, let's just hear what Hill has to say on the subject because he addresses this. He actually addresses this in his books and his magazines and in his speeches. So during his End of the Rainbow speech at the Palmer School of Chiropractic in August of 1921, Hill recounts this experience, saying, like a stroke of lightning out of the clear sky, the 1907 panic swept down on me. Overnight, it swept away every dollar I had. The man with whom I was in business withdrew, talking about Jesse Acree, panic stricken but without loss, and left me with nothing but the empty shell of a company that owned nothing except for a good reputation. So Cree Hill had a good reputation, but he didn't have any capital or wealth, so he wanted to sell it as well. So he sold it to Jesse Shreve. I could have bought $100,000 worth of lumber on that reputation. A crooked lawyer, all right, George Shreve, who afterwards served a term in the penitentiary for some other offense that the details of which are too numerous to be enumerated, saw a chance to cast a reputation and was left in what was left of the lumber company that had been left on my hands. He and a group of other men purchased the company and continued to operate it. I learned a year later that they bought every dollar's worth of lumber they could get a hold of, resold it, and pocketed the proceeds without paying for it. Thus, I had been the innocent means of helping them defraud their creditors, who learned after it was too late that I was in no way connected with the company. All right. So I did want to show you a few articles. This is Jesse Acree here. I'll minimize the page so that you can see these things clearly. So this is Jesse Acree, who was his supervisor and manager at Pearson, and then his co-founder of Acree Hill Lumber Company. And then Some of these articles are just warrants are out for Napoleon Hill. The creditors are looking for him. Um, this is the bankruptcy article of the Cree Hill Lumber Company going into bankruptcy. And if we scroll down a little bit further, this is the article here that outs Shreve as the culprit who was buying lumber on credit and then not paying for it for the creditors, all right, under the name of Cree Hill. So this is the Cincinnati Enquirer, April 29th, 1910. And I'm gonna be more than happy to provide this article. I'm not going to read through it to anybody who would want to see this as proof that Napoleon Hill did not defraud anybody from a lumber business scam. So there's several claims throughout this article from Matt Novak, sharing specific businesses and saying that he scammed them, but the details are only half founded, not actually finished to see the end result of what happened at the end. So we didn't even get the end of the story. It's like watching a movie and not staying to the end and leaving. So it's just kind of like, oh, somebody gets arrested for having bad business dealings, and then you leave the theater. Well, the end of the story of what concluded, of what the actual case finalized, was that it was actually Jesse Shreve who bought a Cree Hill from Napoleon Hill. And then Napoleon Hill moved on to Washington, D.C. with his same name, his same government given middle and last name. And Jesse Shreve was the one that was buying lumber on credit and not paying creditors back. So I want to stop sharing my screen here. So this was episode 7, and just as a reminder, the book is available on audiobook through Audible, on Kindle as an ebook, and in 3 different print forms on Amazon. So you have the full version, which is 700 pages. It's this the Gospel of Napoleon Hill, Scholar or Scammer. Then you have 4 volumes of volume 1, 2, 3, and 4, the full 700 pages divided into 4. And then also you have um, the companion and the abridged version as well too. The abridged version is less than 100 pages, and then the companion guide is all the newspaper clippings. So if you'd like any a free PDF of the book, and then if you'd also like any of the newspaper articles that I mentioned, just message me on the Gospel of Napoleon Hill Scholar or Scammer Facebook page. All right, until next time, guys. Thanks.